Welcome everyone. This is Heather Riggs with the New England Museum Association. We'll wait a few minutes before we actually officially start the program. Hopefully everybody stays muted. That would be great. But if you could start filling out the poll question that we have, that would be great before we start the actual town hall. We do have quite a few people on today, so just be aware that we had over 200 people register. And Betsy and Laurie, can you see the
poll?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, you can see the results.
Yeah, it's like little blue tiny horses in a race.
Who's gonna win? Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Okay, I think we have a good group going so far. So I will officially start us off. I'm Heather Riggs with the New England Museum Association, located here outside of Boston. I want to welcome you today to our town hall. We will be talking about exhibits. I just want to remind everybody that this particular town hall will be focused on the exhibits and not necessarily reopening at the moment. We do have another town hall next week. Feel free to join us, and all of that information is available on the NEMA website to do that. Today's session is being recorded and will be available later on this afternoon on the NEMA website if you have to drop off a little bit early or you want to share this information with some colleagues and stuff. So if you guys are using the chat feature, make sure that you do the chat to everyone so everybody can see all of the information. So I'm actually going to be turning this over to our hosts, Betsy and Laurie. They are our Exhibits PAG chair here at NEMA, and they offered to do this town hall, and we are forever grateful for them for doing this. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Cool, thank you. Laurie, I'm Betsy. Laurie, do you want to introduce who you are, and then we'll start
Sure.
there?
Hello, everyone. So my name is Laurie Pasteryak, and I'm really happy to be here and see all of you. There are very many of you in the town hall, so we're really excited to see everybody, and thanks so much for joining. So my current role is the Director of Interpretation at the Fairfield Museum and History Center in Fairfield, Connecticut. So that means I oversee exhibitions, educations, programs, and our research center and library and collections. So we are in Fairfield, Connecticut, of course, in the Metro New York City corridor. And so what is happening in my community is perhaps very different than a lot of people who are on this phone call or on this Zoom thing. You know, today I just want everyone to remember that all of our experiences are, of course, different. However, we are experiencing the same thing, but it is very different in our local communities. I just thank you all for being here. Go ahead, Bets.
Hi, I'm Betsy Loring. I am principal and founder of Exploring Exhibits and Engagement. By professional DNA, I'm an exhibit developer. My background is in the natural science exhibits for the most part. In my last position in a museum, I oversaw the living collection, the non-living natural history collection, the exhibits, and the facilities departments. And as Heather indicated, we're not talking about reopening, but as Laurie said, everybody is in a different place in where they are in the pandemic. This isn't one outbreak, it's lots and lots of outbreaks, and where you are is different. So we're all doing this in very different backgrounds. But I think we have a chance here. Well, first of all, this is supposed to be a town meeting, which usually involves conversation, which is obviously very difficult. So we've been focusing on, Laurie and I were thinking about this, on focusing on asking questions, because this will help us and NEMA plan future activities around the biggest need. And we also are hoping people can share resources I'm going to type into here right now a link to a Google Doc. It's also at the beginning of the chat. Oh shoot, that went privately. Hang on. Well, I'll do it in a sec. Anyway, there's a Google Doc at the very top of the chat, and I'll keep putting the link in because I've been told by NEMA to do this, where we've started, Laurie and I have started a document. I'm hoping it gets much, much longer, even during this webinar, but also afterwards. Webinars, articles, things that we've personally found helpful that we think would help other exhibit professionals. So this is really, we hope, an exchange of resources and ideas and ways to think about things. So that's that. Do we want to go to the poll maybe?
Yep, Laurie, I forgot to mention, since we do have such a large group on, you do have the chance to actually speak. We're just asking you, because we do have so many people, to maybe raise your hand instead of just unmuting yourself, so we can try not to talk over each other. Also, the chat feature is another way to you know, get your thoughts out and your views and stuff like that. So definitely use either one of those, would be great.
Yeah. So I guess we want to just give Heather, can everyone see the poll, or is it just Betsy and I and you two and you and Meg?
We could end polling to see if we could share results. There we go.
So welcome all of our educators, who is our highest attendee type today, and all of our Massachusetts people. Hey, so we just wanted to get an idea of where you're all from, to understand where we're all coming from here, to help be able to shape the conversation of who's going to be managing exhibits or developing exhibits, and where you are in the world moving forward. And I think perhaps maybe to kick off the conversation, we may want to launch our next poll, unless anyone has any other suggestions.
Yeah, I think if we could launch our next, so here we go. Go ahead.
Nope,
no, go ahead, because you wrote this question.
Okay, so in reopening your museum, I know, again, we're just to stress that we're going to focus here on talking a lot about our concerns about exhibitions. We recognize that there are so many things that come into play in exhibitions. There's, of course, you know, interactives, distancing, materials, collections, cleaning, access, numbers, costs, all of these things that come into play when managing exhibitions and the reopening of museum and getting people back in the game. And so we really wanted to figure out, for perhaps guiding our conversation, of what's the largest concerns, what's the biggest concerns. And again, recognizing that for a children's museum versus a historic house versus you know, outdoor exhibits, people are going to have different concerns, and it's really important for us to be able to shape super conversations of where those concerns lie. So this poll is going to really help shape these future thoughts and opportunities for learning.
So I can, I see, yeah, hands-on physical distancing. Regarding cleaning protocols, one of the resources that I shared in the Google Doc, and the link to the Google Doc is in the chat, is it's called Exhibition Industry Leaders Address COVID-19. That includes an epidemiologist who talks about cleaning and how COVID is really transmitted, and things like that. So I would really point people to that as one resource. I also know, and I'm hoping somebody can type in the chat that they know more information, IMLS was soliciting lists from the museum field for what surfaces people wanted to know how to clean. Is there anybody that can raise their hand and say they know what's happening about that? I'm hoping.
Betsy, do you want to share the link again?
Yeah.
It's at, if you scroll all the way to the top of the chat, it's actually at the very top of the chat and right there too.
Link.
Is it okay for me to close the poll and start sharing it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're seeing that the largest concerns really fall in people and interacting with things in the exhibit, as well as cleaning protocols. I'm with you, everybody, on the 12% of everything, by the way. This is a collective, is a large concern for exhibits and spaces.
And 50%
start.
and 50% feeling like maybe I have the training to deal with this. I wanted to point out another resource that I think has been really helpful. If anybody can join the Association of Children's Museums or the Aztec Association of Science and Technology Centers conversations, I found some of those really helpful. People are talking about how do I stay true to our exhibit philosophy, to our pedagogy? And I think that's one thing to really focus on. How do we stop thinking about our exhibits as disease vectors and get back to thinking of them as educational experiences in new ways? And I would say, I think people are starting to recognize that there's no one after. There are multiple afters, and eventually there is herd immunity. So what we used to do very likely will come back. It's what do we do in that middle time that we're all trying to figure out. Yeah.
So I think this is an opportunity, perhaps, for people to, we started this poll in terms of concerns and training moving forward, and perhaps this is an opportunity to allow people to talk if they have any additional concerns and or training thoughts to add to the mix, now that we have an idea of where people's worries and anxieties might lie.
And yeah, while you're doing that, if I could ask if Greg Murray from the Museum of Science is on this call, can you raise your hand? Because I had a conversation with folks in the Museum of Science, and they had some interesting thoughts about how they were approaching thinking about their exhibits. According to my IMS is planning giving guidance about cleaning different surfaces in about a month. I don't know if everybody can see that in the chat. Amelia Park Museum to everyone.
I am here, Betsy, but it's not letting me raise my hand in a weird way.
Oh, okay. So Greg, could you talk a little bit, I know when we spoke yesterday, Greg is from the Museum of Science and the exhibits department, and how you were sort of reviewing your exhibit experiences, because I think it's so easy to get overwhelmed that we all just need ways to start figuring out how to chop up the elephant before we eat it. And I'd love to hear how you're thinking about your elephant in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the real challenges with coming up with any program to respond to something like this is really to figure out where to start, right? Especially when you're talking about a mid-size or a larger museum that is sort of built on interactive experiences. It was helpful to us to sort of evaluate the entire elephant and then figure out what parts of the elephant we were going to try to eat and what parts of the elephant we just decided were either too risky or too, sure what the right word is, either too risky or too staff intensive to try to maintain. So what we've essentially done, or what we're in the process of doing, is creating a list of each individual exhibit component in the entire museum and sort of sorting that list by the type of interactive experience that they have, whether they have water components or whether they have loose fabric pieces or whether they have loose hard plastic pieces or whether they have buttons or a touch screen. So then we can go back and figure out what the best way to address the physical cleaning and disinfecting of those components. Along those same lines, we're also evaluating each component for how it fits into the educational and strategic goals of the museum to see if there are things that make more sense to put extra focus on.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate it. I remember you talked about one specific interactive that was, you know, it was good, but it wasn't critical to, say, understanding all the other exhibits going around. It involved people having to put their face on the exhibit, and it was something you could move off the floor. And my philosophy is always people don't miss an exhibit that they can't see usually, that it was going to be easier to pull that off rather than spend a lot of time cleaning it, or something that you couldn't really just yank off the floor easily and was really critical to understanding a big concept. You would focus on how to make that a safer experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything in our particular case where we're starting to focus, and we are by no means done with this process. I am in no way implying that we sort of have the list and we're good to go. We're in the same boat that everyone else is, and we're all going to learn together. But as we go through this process, we're paying specific attention to those individual components that maybe we can remove something from the floor. Maybe there's a specific component that has more of a perceived risk, for example, something that you would bring up to your face or have to rest your head on, or have in a position where it's more likely to be encountered by people's faces or spread contamination. Those are all things that we're definitely thinking about as we're figuring out what can stay, what needs to go temporarily, and what may need to be modified forever.
Right. Cool. I will say regarding cleaning protocols, one of the best suggestions I heard from the epidemiologist was take your list of your existing cleaning products and check it against the EPA list before you start buying a whole bunch of new stuff, because you already know they're safe for your exhibit materials. So that's the place to start.
And special thanks to Laura for sharing that helpful resources in the chat, COVID-19 Basics Disinfecting Cultural Resources. I actually uploaded that to the Google Sheet as well. And I'm noting that Eleanor said in Texas, the state historic sites are open. Eleanor, is there anything in particular you'd like to share beyond reopening that you've done specifically for your exhibitions? Not to put you on the spot. So Eleanor responded with the switch to using styluses for interactive screens.
Yeah.
I'm hoping everybody can see the chat.
Yeah.
She is speaking now, so she's unmuted.
Oh, shoot. Okay. I am.
So you can't speak now, Eleanor, if you would like to actually verbal instead of have to type everything out. It's a lot faster.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, exactly. No, we're doing heavily guided tours. So everybody who comes in basically has someone taking them around and explaining things. We switched to the styluses for touching our interactive stuff. What else? We do have masks that we're giving out if people don't show up while wearing a mask. We've tried to prop open doors so that people have less things to touch on their way in. We've also propped open bathroom doors. Those are kind of the things that we've shifted to. We do have hand sanitizer everywhere. We're doing ticket sales over the phone so that we're not handling money or credit cards, things like that. And that's working so far, although we're only a few days in. Does that kind of help, I guess?
Sure. Thank you. I've had another thought, and I'm going to apologize because this is going to make everybody cringe, but the frequent use of hand sanitizer reminds me that everybody is traveling around with their own wipes. So you might want to think about what you're going to do when somebody brings out their own wipe and starts wiping down your exhibits. I've certainly done it on a plane. And I think some of us are going to have some crazed or cloudy plex after this. So I just put that out there from the exhibit standpoint. It's like people don't normally go into museums and start spraying them down, but they might now. So
Betsy, there was kind of the comment in the thing about the stylus is like, does someone take it around with them? Is it cleaned? How is that going to be transferred from exhibit to exhibit? You know, do we all get to keep our own museum stylus?
We've got a bucket at the end where people can drop their styluses in. And then we've been running them through the dishwasher, hosing them down with Lysol. I'm kind of thinking that phone soap might work as well. You know, the cell phone disinfectants, if we can kind of stick them in there. We bought 100 of the cheap ones. So even if people take them home, it's not a big deal.
Eleanor, are you able to get those branded?
that is not something we thought about at first, but oh, that is a good idea. That would
That's a good idea.
Yeah, with a please donate on the bottom.
So, Allie, thanks, Ken, for mentioning the AASLH reopening of historic sites, and Heather and NEMA for doing the reopening conversation next week. So Allie actually had a great note that how people are thinking about phasing their reopening of exhibits specifically, as in whether we're only opening a few things first and adding things back in, or altering almost everything that fits at first. And I think that's where we all come into play in terms of exhibitions, in light of alterations we need to make to our actual physical exhibit spaces, like with using the stylus. Thanks, Eleanor. But does anybody have any thoughts about phasing exhibit specifically? Is there any additional thoughts about that? I don't know. Allie, do you want to talk and add to your question?
Yeah, I think just we're in a very beginning process of thinking about what approaches we're taking to reopening across the board. And one of the things we're sort of wrestling through at the moment is, you know, the idea of opening what we can to test the waters versus trying to change our experience while still keeping it in line with who we are and what we're good at offering and what our public is looking to us for. So I'm just curious about the exhibit side of rephasing, because there's lots of changes that we could make down to every little detail, but there's also an approach of sort of opening some things first and then adding later other things. And by later, I mean like maybe in the next day or week, not months.
We do have a raised hand from Eric Greenberg. Hi, Eric.
Hi, I'm unmuted. Look at that.
You're unmuted, yes.
Well, I was thinking, so actually, I raised my hand about another thing. I'll try and be quick. But Allie, we've been thinking about this too, not with exhibits necessarily, because NRF has a historic house, and then another historic house that we use as a furniture museum, and so we're thinking a little differently. But our response changes. I mean, we're planning for everything because we're looking at, the governor of Rhode Island's sort of mandate seems to change. I don't want to say day by day. That's not fair, but week by week, and we have to think about what we're actually going to be allowed to do. But I wanted to ask a question. I think it was Greg who was talking about the perception of things that are dirty or unclean or dangerous. And I'm wondering if anybody has done any sort of research with the public about what they do perceive as risky, unclean, etc. I know I was on a webinar a few weeks ago with some attractions in Asia where they were able to see firsthand what people are thinking. But I don't think most of us, with the exception of the great state of Texas, I don't think most of us are really sort of at that point yet. So I'm wondering how we're going to find out what perception is, what perception. Perception are.
I can speak a little bit to this, and I'm going to offer a resource of I don't know if people follow or have heard of Susie Wilkening and Wilkening Consulting. So that's actually on our resource list on the Google Sheet. Susie's been doing some basic visitor infographic based on visitor perceptions, and nothing has really touched on in particular what people think is dirty or how they perceive. Personally, our museum in Connecticut, our governor just announced that we're allowed to do summer camp. And of course, summer campers kind of stroll through the exhibits. So in the same breath, he closed schools for the rest of the year, but also then said, but you can have summer camp. And so that was an interesting dichotomy. So our museum actually dropped a Google survey out to our specific community to say, what are your comforts on summer camps? What are the numbers? What, where do you want them? How many people do you want them? And just a series of questions to our audience. So because all of our sites and museums are very different, I think that it's a great time to poll your audience on what they want to see and what they want to have access to. And again, would recommend following Susie Wilkening in Wilkening Consulting to see if she's got anything perhaps coming out in the future about perceptions of museums and access. That's just my thoughts. Does anybody else have any suggestions?
Well, the other resource that's also researching what makes people feel like they're going to be comfortable going back to cultural resources is Colleen Schneider. I know everybody's heard her name.
I just dropped the link of the most recent article in the chat for you.
And she's in the Google Sheet as well. Her website is called Know Your Own Bone. She's done a bunch of surveying, and frankly, how often people clean stuff was way down in the bottom of the list. It was a lot more about whether the governor or the state was opening and things like that. Now, again, it's not the same as our visitors. One of the webinars I also plopped in there by the Museum, which is I think it's a Massachusetts-based company that does digital interactives. They've been doing a lot of really good webinars. He just interviews people from different museums, and there are 2 about reopening. So again, they're focused on reopening, not on exhibits specifically, but one place that has reopened, it's an outdoor, sort of nature center, but they're surveying their visitors. How was your experience? Did you feel safe or comfortable coming here? What's good about our reopening? What can we change? So I think we have to Allie's point about opening gradually, I think we have to take a prototyping mindset to what people feel comfortable with. Frankly, I'm using the words cleaning theater because the #1 risk to people is people more than surfaces. But I mean, in fact, one of the things the epidemiologist said is if you have the choice between 2 cleaners and one smells cleaner, go for that. I think, Laura, you pointed out, we're just trying to make people figure out ways to make our visitors feel safe and comfortable because that's what they expect in a museum.
Absolutely. And, in one of the, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Of, someone visiting your museum, they're not necessarily there for, a program or whatever it might be, but exhibitions are one of the #1 reasons people visit museum. And if a person doesn't feel safe in that exhibit, then they're certainly not going to have a good time at your museum or want to come back. So in thinking about people's safety and comfort level in exhibitions, that's going to be different in an art museum to a historic site or wherever it may be. But what types of things I think we can do in our exhibitions to make people feel comfortable. And of course, that goes with sharing cleaning protocols and whatever may be in place. But are there physical alterations that anyone is planning to their exhibits to think about keeping them #1 open and accessible, but most of all comfortable for people beyond cleaning? Because we all know this cleaning thing is a big deal. Is there anyone out there making alterations?
Well, one thing about the cleaning, I just wanted, and if people don't see it in the chat while they're thinking about answering Laurie, somebody said regarding touch screens where people are going to glop them up, that's where a cling protector would protect the screen. It's going to still, it's going to act in terms of either harboring or not harboring germs. It's going to be the same, but that would protect the thing. So I'm wondering if there's other ways we can protect our exhibits a little bit. But yeah, I'd love to hear from people. What have you already started planning? I know, for instance, the maker community has been talking about changing how they're doing things. Allie, did you sit in on that webinar by any chance about the maker community, what the people were changing there? Somebody from your museum did.
I didn't. I think that was Liz, who's I think on here.
Yeah.
I'm here, and yes, that was me that was on it. Yeah, I mean, I think a big takeaway from that, I think for me, and again, one of the things that we're thinking about a lot is, and I mean, this is, I think, the idea of right, altering our experiences in terms of, how do I want to say this? Like materials we can feel we can safely control versus like more kind of everybody's hand is in the big pot of yarn sort of experience. And that's, I guess, to a space like a maker space, but also as we think about our public programs and things like that. So, you know, not knowing how relatable that is to necessarily everyone, but I think that that is kind of a big piece of it. Part of it is staying true to kind of the open-ended nature of things, while also wanting to provide a little bit more structured experience that we feel we can safely control.
Yeah, I see in the chat, some people have talked about eliminating a touchscreen. That was a component that they felt they could get that content delivered in another way in the short term. I see somebody talking, Doug Tilton, talking about manipulatives and reducing the number of sort of manipulatives. Yeah, I've heard people talk about reducing the number of loose parts so that they can be swapped out frequently and cleaned. So.
There's also been a couple comments in the chat about some of the historic site houses, because we do have quite a few of them here in New England. Some of them are just not touring the houses right now, or they're just basically popping their head in. From that, I know Becky mentioned that from Strawberry Bank, that they're just doing outside tours. I don't know, Becky, if you want to talk more about that or not.
Yeah, we're planning on opening July 1st. Barring that everything is okay and we're allowed to do that. But we are very concerned about having people go into the houses because they don't have a lot of space in them. So we've created a tour where there are 4 different stops around the museum, and it's a guided tour. We're debating about whether we might have role players outside, and we just thought it might make people feel safer if they're out in the open air. But we also are wondering if we're debating about self-guided or tour guiding, because when you put people on a tour, then does that automatically make them have to cluster and feel less safe? And if it's self-guided, they can kind of spread out and do it on their own.
And then Julie from House of Seven Gables too, because I know you guys have some really tight quarters. Are you reimagining how you're going to reinterpret that exhibit?
Yeah, so our visitor services team just came back from furlough, and we have been in the process of just kind of, doing this research for reopening and what that's going to look like. So I just want to say thank you to Eleanor from Texas, because hearing that it's not horrible and scary is super helpful and comforting, and I know my staff will appreciate that too. But we are looking, and also thank you to Becky too. We'll be reaching out to you and kind of going off of some of your ideas and plans as well. But so at this point, we are looking at doing some kind of online ticketing. The challenge for us is that we're in the process of changing our POS system. So we're kind of going to have to do like doubled up on work to do this online ticketing, but we're going to make that work. And that's going to be the mandate, is that you have to buy tickets ahead of time to come and visit, and we'll have those out at select times. At this point, so long as the governor of Massachusetts is continuing to require masks, we'll be requiring masks on site. And what we're kind of looking at doing is a hybrid of inside and outside tours. We thought for anybody who's visited the Gables before, the secret staircase is there, and the secret staircase is basically an unventilated air shaft. Didn't think people would feel super comfortable going up and into there. So we're considering doing something that would be kind of an outdoor welcome, a first floor tour of the House of the Seven Gables, another 15 to 20 minutes of a guided tour of the grounds, and then another stop in the Nathaniel Hawthorne birthplace. We'll be closing off our counting house, which is kind of our family and interactive space, at least for the first, few weeks to month of opening, more along the lines of staff resources in sanitation versus anything else. A lot of this is just, how many staff are we going to be able to afford to have on, let alone, the additional responsibilities of cleaning and sanitation and who goes into that rotation and who does what. So for us, that's kind of what we're looking at from a tour perspective. From a staffing, we're just going to kind of open with maybe like 3 tours an hour, see how much they fill up. And if we can bring back more staff for more tours, if the demand is there, then we'll just kind of gradually increase our staff and who's on site. But we're also trying to give considerations to where will our staff be in between tours on site. Right now, we've got kind of the interpreter's office space, and we have a staff hub. 2 communal spaces on site that probably won't be the most attractive places for staff to be, nor the safest, at least in the first few weeks to month of reopening. So just a lot to think about, but from the visitor perspective and exhibit perspective. Also, for those who have visited the Gables, you know that we have those like jail-like wooden stanchions that kind of go throughout our exhibit space. We probably, if we go with this first floor tour plan, will remove those wooden stanchions for the time being, and kind of just put up those, you know, elastic, stretchy, ribbon style stanchions for, again, the first maybe few months that we're open or whatever, just because it's a lot less for us to maintain and sanitize and take care of.
Julie, we've got a question here where somebody wants to know what software you're planning on using for online ticketing.
So we currently use TAM, which is the assistant manager, which is our current POS system, and we're switching over to AllTrue, which is a Blackbaud software. So for right now, we're just going to kind of be using both software, starting off with TAM and then switching over to AllTrue as we go. I have heard suggestions out there about WooCommerce. Anybody who has a WordPress website, I've heard really great things about WooCommerce and the ability to kind of do some time ticketing and timed options. So I can help make a connection if anybody would like that. And I'd be curious to see what anybody else is using too. And yeah, I'll spell out the names of those software. I see that question on there. But that's kind of our switch and our transition right now. And we're going to see if TAM really proves to be problematic for us in getting this just up and out there quickly. We may just use something simple like Eventbrite for the time being.
Another interesting question came in through the chat is basically because a lot of museums do have those interactive exhibit pieces and stuff like that. Has anybody thought of making those interactive exhibit pieces things that people can take home instead of actually items that are left in the museum?
Yeah, I'm seeing an interesting transition from thinking about group interactives to singular interactives. Like, how can you move what normally was a group congregation space and those physical objects and or that experience to a personal experience? I'm wondering if anyone's considered of moving, you know, for example, we have at the Fairfield Museum, we have an outdoor chalkboard that people can write. And we've had the conversation of turning that into a public virtual chalkboard. Even though it's outdoors and people are still writing on it, we're still giving, you know, thinking about developing a virtual space where people can interact like that rather and through an exhibit rather than together in a physical space. As we would normally be meeting in a physical space here like this, and now we've moved it to a virtual space. So I'm curious about people's ideas about, number one, moving to more individual interactive takeaways like Heather mentioned, or kind of the virtual space for interaction.
Granted, a lot of it does come down to money, so very much aware of that too.
Yeah, I mean, somebody did post, yeah, Becky posted about the new, what is that, the New Hampshire humanities.org cares. Yeah, if anybody has any other leads on creative ways to fund for this, that might be an option. That would be helpful to share. How happening changed the design of exhibitions. Yeah. Yeah, has anybody been really thinking that through with in terms of design on their exhibits?
Yeah, this is Chris.
Yeah.
We're proposing the use of image recognition apps on your phone, like Google Lens, to deliver media elements, or, you know, I'm not sure how deep we'll be able to get into the interaction on it, but I know you can use image recognition apps to link to a website that might have media or more content. So that's one of the things that we're looking into. So you're using your own phone and not sharing it with somebody else.
Yeah. Well, and somebody talked, for instance, about changing the microscopes from ones where people use their eye to a video scope and things like that, so that you can see, which I actually prefer in terms of interactivity, because more people can see a big screen. So 8 people can see a little rotifer rather than one person at a time. So I guess that's what I'm curious about, how many people have thought of things where in fact you're increasing accessibility, you're increasing engagement or changing that experience. I just think that's a really interesting design challenge for a lot of us. Yeah, motion-based things. Yeah, people are adding virtual tours. Yeah. So should we put the rest of the questions out?
I think those questions
were
the
gonna
open-ended
ask them,
ones.
that's right.
Yes. There actually has been several of us. I know this is more focused on exhibits and design and stuff like that, but there's also that whole design of a gift shop.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to maybe ask about that one, because it has come up several times in the chat about how do you deal with people in that tighter space, because they are usually tighter spaces, and they also have that touch element as well. I don't know if anybody's thought about that yet, of how they are going to deal with the gift shop.
I mean, to me, that feels like something we can look at our retail brethren that have already had to open.
Mm-hmm.
You know, person to person is the biggest way, from everything I've heard, about spreading the virus. So limiting the number of people that can be in there. Yeah, whether you can limit the number of people coming in, or they can ask staff to pick things up and show it to them. I don't know. Products.
Yep. So there are some, I know I was on a call earlier that the person said that we'll just have one item of each out. Probably don't touch. If not, then it needs to go away for a little while, and basically have all the merchandise in the back room still packaged and stuff like that. So people aren't sitting there touching it and playing with it and manipulating it. I mean, it's just like exhibits in the museum that people play with.
Yeah. Yeah, one suggestion I heard, because somebody in here talked about concerns for frontline staff, especially people that are out cleaning. I know the Museum of Science in Boston, you know, has floated an idea. I shouldn't have said who that was. Floated the idea that everybody will take a turn doing cleaning. You know, I think we need to be really careful about the equity and access, and who's doing the cleaning and who's out on the front lines dealing with the public. Because one thing I've picked up from webinars is that you're going to get complaints. Half of them are going to be that you're too restrictive, and half are going to be you're not being restrictive enough. So I think anticipating those questions and having lots of management backup for everybody out on the front line is going to be really important.
Yeah, Eric Greenberg has another raised hand. He's also MC next week's town hall, by the way, so I'm plugging that one for him right now. So he will be the one in charge next week.
Yeah,
or one of them. So what's his idea?
Right, so I almost feel.
Yeah,
so I almost feel unsure about sharing this because I'm giving away the farm. In response to the merchandise question, there is a very, very good chance that we won't have any merchandise, that all merchandise will be sold online, that no samples will be available, because our merchandise area is in a narrow vestibule that brings you into the house, and in our smaller museum, it's in an even smaller space. And I think Betsy has raised some really important points about the fact that cleaning surfaces will be important for a number of reasons, but creating distance is going to be the critical thing that we're going to all try and do. And so we were just talking yesterday, including one of my colleagues, one of our staff who is on this who's on this town hall right now, Gina Tangora, we were just talking yesterday about possibly not putting any merchandise inside the physical space for fear that people will loiter, that they'll be touching and exchanging, the germs, and so that's where our head is right now. There may be a good chance we won't have any merchandise out.
So can I ask a question? Those same people are going to be touching the doors of the restrooms. They're going to be opening doors. They're going to be putting their hands on railings. They're going to be doing all of those things. So I think
But Betsy, if I may, that's not the point I'm trying to make. I actually concur with all of that. Thing is that we are worried about, one of my staff used the term bunching, right? We're worried about people standing very close to each other. And that's our issue with merchandise. It's not, I mean, certainly part of it, but it is everyone standing in close proximity to get a look at that book or that scarf. And that's what that's what I am most worried about. That's one of the things when I sit down and think about how we're going to keep people safe. That's probably tops on our list is bunching.
Yeah, Eric and Betsy, and I know thinking about people bunching up and access, I mean, in terms of exhibitions and in stores, thinking about our one-way aisles, right, in our grocery stores. I'm not sure where everybody is coming from, and as well as kind of lines on the floor and numbers of people in specific areas is something that is probably very inexpensive and available to all museums and exhibits that go beyond the ticketed entry, that go beyond the reopening. It's just managing the amount of people that are in the space at the same time. I'm not sure if everybody's seen all of those lines outside Home Depot on all of the weekends in their towns or Lowe's or wherever stores it's been, but I think this is something that we're going to have to consider implementing throughout our spaces, and especially in exhibits. I'm thinking about the Louvre and how they handle people at the Mona Lisa, for example, or how art museums already have lines in front of artworks to say you can only be this close. People do respond well to floor space, floor kind of boxes, and how can we creatively use those physical barriers that we're going to put into place to perhaps maybe interpret further, or how physically we can build those things and make them perhaps more fun.
I wanted to amplify what Chris put up. I don't know what NPS is, but ADA and things like that. I think it's going to be important for us to really be thinking, being sure we don't go backwards in terms of accessibility, and hopefully take a step forward. So, and this isn't exhibit related, but anybody who relies on lip reading is screwed right now because of masks. And yet, also on the webinar with the epidemiologist, it also had an insurance guy. I've never thought insurance could be so interesting, and I enjoyed it. But it also had somebody who was talking about different touchless technologies. Most of us can't afford it, but it was talking about using facial recognition to the point where somebody could state a preference for their language, or if they want sign language, or what their interpretive experience would be, and having that come up. So for those 3 of you out there on the webinar who live in the land of buckets of money, that sounded really cool because it had a real accessibility component too. You could pop up somebody who was signing, or something like that. But for the rest of it, I think it's really worth thinking about that. We all talk about like one-way flow through our exhibits. Well, does that accommodate elevators and things like that? So.
Yeah, I think, those are good suggestions. I just want to point out 2 comments that have popped up in the chat. One is that there is a company making clear masks to help with both lip reading as that. And as well, I believe from the Amelia Park Museum, was like, oh, how do you see kind of lines on the floor helping at children's museums? And I'm like laughing because like I do not by no means attempt to control children. I don't think that's even possibly, you know, an option. And this is where I wanted to jump into because we have about 10 minutes left. We had two questions that were really, or one major question for everybody in thinking about training and resources that you want to be made available for yourself, your staff, your organization. We recognize that, for example, right, children's museums have a different audience to maintain and serve than a historic house. And so we're wondering of any of the ideas that you've seen come up today or any options for future PAG meetups or, you know, things like this. What do you want? What would you want to see? And what can Betsy and I and the folks at NEMA do for you?
And while you're typing those in, well, I just lost it. Completely forgotten it.
I do have something to say because it is mentioned several times. And Emily, I am listening to you. I am hearing you. Just a reminder, as we are talking about making sure that everybody needs to register online, pay online. We are not a cashless society. In some states, it is a law that you are to accept cash. Yeah. Keep that in mind. Emily, I hope that covers that. I know it probably doesn't answer your question, but just keep in mind that Massachusetts, it is by law that you need to accept cash. So going to completely ticketless, you know, non-touch might not be a possibility for everybody.
Yeah.
Also, you can literally throw dollar bills in the washing machine. So, you know, if you have to spray your cash drawer down with Lysol every day, like that, it's not a great way around the issue, but you're not going to be destroying your dollar bills if you do it.
Again, I would point people to listening to the webinar with the epidemiologist to really understand. It's not that dry surfaces can't have virus detectable on them, but again, it's that person to person, it's droplets, it's where people can't maintain social distance, like small children who drool on things. I've been told it was a very depressing webinar. I thought it was actually helpful because I think a lot of us worry if we don't get stuff perfectly clean that we're going to cause this whole outbreak. And that's a different question. It's really about that human contact. So.
Special thanks to Meg Nickel for asking for the town hall webinar focused on family-focused spaces and children's museums that Betsy just mentioned. Go, Meg. Again, I by no means have any idea what to do in children's museums, but Betsy and I can certainly help put that together for everybody.
Somebody, we did one on, was that
maintaining accessibility.
Oh, good.
So, yeah, this was me. I just dropped the link into the chat. We did do a town hall a few weeks back on working with children when museums reopen. So I just dropped the link to the recording in there. That's NEMA's YouTube channel where all of our previous programs currently live. I think it certainly would be worth doing again, but just to let you guys know.
And I will say that Association of Children's Museums have different, they have a facilities group and then they have an exhibit group. When they've had their meetups, they are not recorded specifically so that people can speak very frankly. So it doesn't work as a resource to go look at a webinar, but it's a really helpful place. And I've heard some really interesting things, people talking about climbers where they had climbers they could make one way and they could wait till a kid was up top and then the next kid through. And this was an outdoor climber, whereas indoor climbers where it's helter-skelter and you can't do social distancing, people were not feeling like they could open that quickly. So there's just been a lot of, I don't know if you have to be a member of a children's museum association. This is where.
I'm gonna, I'm gonna jump in here and think about accessibility of, you know, being able to go to these meetups, but I'm noting that a few people like the idea of an accessibility webinar or conversation. So when you say accessibility, do you mean kind of prototyping, interactive accessibility, or when you say accessibility, do you mean closer to ADA and additions on top of ADA? I'm curious of what people's perspectives might be.
Yeah, I had been thinking ADA.
ADA.
Yeah, ADA. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Discussion on touch-free exhibit solutions. Yes.
Yeah.
Tactile elements. Oh, all of these great ideas. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you didn't have to say you were saying thanks from Texas because you used the word y'all there, Rena. Not a common expression up here.
Perhaps, and we have a few minutes left. Does anybody want to also maybe perhaps raise their hand? Did anybody get a chance to speak that wanted to speak, recognizing accessibility and openness
and especially
equity?
Resources? Please add to the Google Doc. I am sure you've heard some really interesting conversations. I do encourage any webinars that involve interviews with other folks, because it's great that people are sharing how they're thinking about things, which is really, I think, the most important part. How are people tackling their questions? Not exactly what are they doing.
Hi, everybody. For some reason, I wouldn't let me raise my hand, but this is Ann DeMonte from the Audubon Society of Rhode Island in Bristol. And something to keep in mind for all of you, we have, I think, 7 cultural museums here in this tiny little town of Bristol, Rhode Island. And what we've just done is we have started Zoom and group meetings, all of us talking about how we are handling everything we're talking about here today, and trying to make decisions based on a larger group together, and going to our Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce and our governor, because it seems like, unfortunately, the governor of Rhode Island is sort of missing our niche, which obviously we fall to the bottom of her list, which I get, because she's trying to get, you know, she's trying to get restaurants open, and she's trying to get schools, distant learning settled, and, you know, all of those retail stores and those kind of things. So a little museum is not on her top of her to-do list. But coming together as 7 museums and going to the governor as a group, they're suddenly like, oh, maybe we should address this issue. So if you have other museums close to you or within your town, I highly recommend grouping together. It has been huge for us, and very helpful to know that within our own town, we're not alone and we're working together. So for those of you out there that have facilities around you, and we're not all the same. Some of us are historical museums. I'm a nature center. So we're all, some are historical homes, but it helps to gather together. So I think, you know, if you can show a force together, it would help with some of these things, I think, especially when you're speaking to your town or government agency.
Thank you, Anne. We had that on the top of our list of things we were going to mention and then forgot. One of the webinars that I listened to yesterday, one of the Museums webinars, everybody at the cultural orgs in Philadelphia were working together. You're going to have to be working with your state and local officials. You're probably not going to be able to make this decision all by yourself. And if you can join with the other cultural organizations to stay coordinated as both for that power that Anne's talking about, but also just to be coordinated, brilliant idea.
And I will be leaving the link to the Google Doc on the NEMA website. So if you go to the NEMA website and under conference and events, you'll see the link to today's recording, and I'll also put the link in there so we can still continue to build off of that or come back to it later on. And we will make sure that we can edit it, the link that I put up there. So
yeah, I mean, another thing that would be really cool when you have these groups from one town, if you can have reps to talk to some groups from other towns, so that again, you're tapping the collective wisdom, but minimizing the number of Zoom meetings you have to be on.
Yeah, I know for the state of Massachusetts, we're forced, you know, Baker did announce his reopening task force, and the cultural institutions were missing. And so we're really advocating for him to open it up. So he did open it up again. We'll see if a cultural institution goes on, because museums do feed the economy quite a bit, and we should be listened to.
Well, and given that MCC is funded by the state, it, yeah.
There is on the Google Sheet, just so everybody knows, Connecticut Arts and Culture Commission did come out with guidelines to help you think through opening up your cultural institution. And it does go beyond just opening the doors. It also includes very specific items to consider for exhibits, which is why we included it on that Google Sheet. And again, it's a working document, just like all things are kind of, we're experiencing are changing with time. We must be flexible.
And I should say we are open to having more of these town halls that are loosely based on one topic, without really, a guiding force. I think, the strength of these town halls is everybody talking to each other, giving each other ideas. I think that's probably the best thing that we could do, is just keep talking to each other and seeing what everybody else is doing. But we are coming up at 12:02, so
thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks, Betsy and Laurie, for leading us today. If you guys want to ever volunteer, give us an email. Beware. We will take you up on it. It's easy.
It's totally easy.
No worries.
I just put Heather's and my emails in the chat.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Be well.
Thanks everybody. And
have a good day.
Thanks to the 24% from outside New England. Yeah.
Care.
Cool. All right. Nice. Ooh, brought up issues we hadn't thought of, which was helpful. Nice to know. Yay. Cool. All right. Thank you, NEMA.
Thank you, guys.
Helpful.
You did great. Thank you so
much. Well, thank you. Really helpful.